Hey, this is a response to a recent article published on Goonhammer, written by Alexander, and I'll start this with a caveat. I am not trying to shit on Alexander and his excellent article. I really enjoyed reading that article, by the way. It is great. The written word really is something that you can't replace it with just talking. But it was an article that proposed to actually inform and advise people on how to play Japanese. And as soon as you do that, I have words. So these are the words. There's a lot of excellent material in the article, really. There's also some things that I think is just dead wrong. So let's talk about it, I guess. So this is the article. Goonhammer Historicals Getting Started in Bold Action, the Japanese Army Beginner's Guide. Whoa, sorry, that wasn't intentional. So this is supposed to be for new Japanese players, why you should start playing Japanese, and this is one of the of my main gripes, I think, because I do have gripes with what's written here. I think some of it is wrong, some of it is like bang on right, but some of it is wrong. Why would you choose Japanese? They are the most fun army in bold action. I disagree completely. The Japanese is a frustrating army to play. It is a massively frustrating army to play because what happens is you lose so many models each game. And you will typically not win events. We haven't seen a Japanese army win an event for quite some time if it was a just slightly competitive event. So the Japanese army is not good. It should be, but it's really not. It's definitely not a thing that Japanese armies are doing well out there. They may do so in casual games, in historical games, possibly even, but in competitive gaming, no, they are not. They are a difficult army to play. They are really a difficult army to play. And Alexander does mention this, that the vehicles are made of tinfoil. Yeah, that's one of the problems. And the fact that all you need, he writes here, all you need is a man with a bayonet and a gun. Okay, that doesn't really work in bold action, because what will happen is you'll get shot down. Most armies that do well in the competitive scene are geared towards killing infantry, and that's what the Japanese are bringing, because they haven't got anything else. So in that respect, I think it's wrong. I don't think that you play Japanese because it's fun. I think you play Japanese because you want the challenge, because you like painting them, because you like assaulting, and because you like the playstyle that comes with playing Japanese. So some people really enjoy that, and some people do massively well with Japanese. Manuel is a great example. Like, he's been world champion 2-3 times, individual world champion 3 times or something like that. So and he's done so with Horde Japanese. So you can do well, but most of us don't. Most of us find it immensely frustrating to play Japanese. He also writes that there's like all-out aggression. What, here we have it somewhere here. The best strategy is sheer aggression. No, it's not. That will lose your games toot sweet. It's not how you play Japanese and win games. If you are going to go all out bloodlust, I just want to charge and kill stuff, you're going to lose games. And it's going to go really quickly downhill. He does mention that every victory is a Pyrrhic victory because you're going to end up a horde of casualties. And that is absolutely true. But my claim here is you won't win many games. especially not against an opponent who knows what they're doing. You'll actually lose way more. So the aggression that you need with Japanese is a modified aggression. You need to be cautious. You need to use terrain, and he does write it. You really need to be clever about how to use terrain. He writes that, but I just think that the best strategy is sheer aggression is just off. So yeah. And then, of course, he mentioned the best national rules. And as soon as we have that, I thought, well, I did a video on that. They are not the best national rules. I disagree. But we can talk about it. They're pretty good. Death Before Dishonor, that's the one that gives all your infantry fanatics, which is great. Banzai just pairs really well with assault troops. Unfortunately, when we get to talking about troops, and Alexander does this later on, there is a problem there. So, yeah. One thing that he does miss here is at the Banzai charge here. Right, let's go here. They have to issue a run order towards an enemy unit. That's not actually true. They have to issue an assault order towards the nearest enemy unit, which is one of the problems, because you have to try to get into close combat, and you have to do it against the closest visible enemy unit, which may not be to your liking. So the actual, like, how he typed out the rules here doesn't really fit. Anyways, I make a lot of mistakes too. So again, no shitting on Alexander's excellent piece here. Right, we go down and he talks about strategy. There's a lot of things I have to say about this. So, Japanese infantry are badasses. No, they're not. They're really not. The Japanese infantry is lackluster compared to other nations' infantry. They don't really have a lot of killy units. So they don't have anything that has where you have tough fighter and massive amounts on units that you actually want it on, because they do have one unit. There's one unit, and that is the Manchukuo cavalry, where you can get tough fighter, but they are only regulars, and you don't really typically want regulars to be your assault troops. You want either cheap, inexperienced troops, or you want veterans, because regulars are just going to die both on the approach and in close combat. So for me, the Japanese infantry roster is completely lackluster and not badass at all. And that's also what we're seeing in the competitive games. The Japanese players are struggling to finish at the top. World Open War was the latest major international tournament, and the Japanese players, they weren't doing well. The Japanese armies were getting their asses handed to them unless you were a very, very good player who plays Japanese all the time. Then you may have stood a little bit of a chance. Again, use Manuel as a good example. He also writes that you should use terrain. Right, where did he have that? Yeah, move forward through cover as far as possible to avoid taking casualties. This is it. This is what you need to do. And you need to be able to string out your infantry behind cover so that you have hard cover even though you're approaching the enemy. The good Japanese players will do this. They'll still lose games, but they will do this quite a lot. The first time I tried using Japanese, I just went for it because Japanese infantry are badass and their special rules benefit assault. So I just moved up and I ran towards the enemy and I got cut down. The same enemy, we switched armies and he beat me. So there is something, and what he was good at was using that stringing around area terrain and very carefully setting up for the assault, because you can't just run at an enemy in assault. And this is exactly Alexander's point here. You have to be clever about how you do it. Otherwise, you're going to lose too many of your dudes going in, and then you're going to lose those close combats, or you're not going to be as effective as you want them to be. So Japanese troops are very finicky and very difficult to use. Right, here's another one. This is a good point. Get to objectives before your opponent, because then they're forced to shift you off, and that is very difficult. This is extremely true. That's another brilliant point here by Alexander. If you get your fanatic veterans onto an objective, they're not going to be able to shift you. They are not going, because even assault troops will stay at range of veterans standing on an objective on ambush. If you shoot them, then they can go down and you're not going to kill them because they're veterans. If you flamer them, which is another tactic that many people use, well, they're fanatics, so they don't care about that. So whatever you do to that unit, if you get to the objectives first with Japanese, especially Japanese veterans, it is exceedingly difficult to shift them. You need HE and you need zeroing in with big blobs of HE, and then you need to kill the whole unit because they're not going to move. So this one is a brilliant idea. Right. He also writes, if the scenario allows it, consider outflanking. This will allow your units to come in from the sides of the table and surprise vulnerable units. Don't do that. You need specific dedicated outflankers. So you need full strength units in order to get that re-rollable. Otherwise, you're not going to come in when you want to. That will just happen in like almost 50% of the games. And your units are just not set up in order to really make use of outflanks. Because you have riflemen. Most of the time what you'll get in Japanese armies is inexperienced riflemen, because they're very cheap and they're good for what they do, but they are bad at outflanking. Those rifles are not going to be effective. What you come onto, when you come onto the table, you're going to shoot at something that will go down, and then you're stuck there with an inexperienced unit that will get obliterated next turn. Outflanks with Japanese are not a thing that you see in most competitive games at all. So I think that you lack the tools for decent outflanking forces. Decent outflanking forces will have the access to a Panzerfaust, that you can kill vehicles, or access to a flamethrower, so like a flamer in a jeep with a lieutenant. Perfect outflanking unit. Japanese, not so much. Right. Next bit is, he writes that a typical build is the large amounts of infantry and high explosives to clear out enemy units. That is how most competitive Japanese armies are built. I completely agree. That is how you build a good Japanese army. I have seen experiments with other types of builds for Japanese. I think there's something to be said for veteran builds or for leaf blower builds where you have grenadiers like knee mortars in your units. But the standard Japanese army that we see at tournaments is a horde of inex infantry, possibly regular if you're wanting to spend extra points and not wanting to win. And then as much HE as you can put in the list. So HE tanks, howitzers, mortars, all of it. And then you just try and shoot the enemy to death before they actually connect to your infantry. That's the way you pull that army. Now the next bit that he writes here, Japanese armies tend to have a large amount of order dice because they favor infantry and can take many small teams. Yes. Typically at 1,000 points you should have 12 to 15 order dice. That's not high. That is low. That is very, very low. If you're running competitive Japanese, 12 order dice as high, that it's 5 order dice below what you'll see most veteran armies bring. No. Japanese order dice needs to go from 16 and up. At least 16. Especially because you can bring single-man suicidal units. 3 of those, that's 3 order dice for nothing. They are so dirt cheap. So advising people to bring 12 to 15 order dice is setting them up for failure. That's wrong. I'm sorry, that's not good advice at all. And it does not put you in a situation where you cover, where you get the last dice and first dice at all. It will get you in the opposite situation in almost all tournaments. This said, you will see in some American tournaments the average order dice being 13. The average order dice in Europe is 14, 15. But in the US, possibly in Australia, you see lower order dice counts, but not 12. And having 15, like 2 above the average, does not guarantee you first and last order dice. Nope, it does not. That's not a thing. I'm sorry. So it can be a huge advantage. I agree, all of that, but the actual order dice count here that he's quoting is just off. Go from 16 to 22 at 1,000 points. That is what you should aim for with Japanese. 16 to 22. If you go above that, you have too many small teams and you're going to be a little vulnerable. A lot of your infantry units are going to be small sized. So that is bad. I think the ideal would be around 18 order dice. But you should never go below 16. Unless you're running a completely different Japanese list with veterans instead. Which you could do. Yeah, I agree. Right. Here. Then we have the next one. Many Japanese players struggle with how to handle enemy vehicles because they don't have strong armor or anti-tank choices. True. You have a couple choices. The access to suicide anti-tank teams, which are extremely cheap and effective. Not really effective, but he does write how they're effective, and he's completely right on that. And another option, which is hard to accept, ignore the enemy tank, which is what most Japanese players will do. They'll sit there, and if the enemy tank shoots at them, they'll go down. They won't, maybe lose a couple of guys, whatever. But most of the time, the enemy tank will be extremely ineffective because they're shooting at stuff that's going down. And because the Japanese player has more order dice than their opponents, so like 3 or 4 more, he will then have other units that can move against the tank or against the objectives or what have you, right? So he can afford to have that tank, maybe even put 2 of his units down. It doesn't really matter. So this tactic is spot on. That is how you deal with enemy armor as a Japanese player. Plus, you do what he also writes with the anti-tank here, the unit selection. He does, it's further down. He writes something where it's the suicide anti-tankers, which has a nice picture. By the way, really nice pictures and nicely painted models in this one. He writes that the suicide anti-tanker is there mainly to deter enemy armor, and that is what it does. It's so rare that it actually gets to connect with a piece of armor, because if you run at the tank before it's done anything, well, you're charging the tank, which means the tank will get defensive fire, which means it will shoot you down with its machine guns. Then you need 2 suicide anti-tankers in order to connect. One of them will die, the other will possibly connect. It just turns into a huge gamble, and it rarely happens. Rarely happens. I think over the last 8 tournaments I've been at, I've lost 1 tank to a suicide, and I've played against a lot of Japanese armies. At WTC Cork, I was playing almost exclusively against Japanese armies because my army is really good at killing infantry. So, yeah, no. And this is actually what he writes. Right. This quote here, voila, Japan wins. No, it doesn't. Mapping up, yeah. This sentence bothered me a bit. It oversells what Japan can do. It says here, now, once most of the enemy infantry have been killed through a generous application of HE shells and bayonets, it's a simple matter of claiming any objectives and mopping up any remaining enemy teams to claim their order dice, and voila, Japan wins. No, they don't. Japan hardly ever wins. it's not a simple matter of making the Japanese army work. It's very hard. It takes a lot of training. Yeah, so that's the thing. Right. Then he goes on to talk about unit selection, which is where we get to all what I often do on this channel. And believe me, I don't want to do this all the time, but it often comes down to list reviews and units and what is effective and what is not. Not really what I enjoy the most, but it's part of the channel by now. Can't get away from it. Right. There are hundreds of options, he writes. Yes. Tank variants. Yes. There's the infantry options. There are so many options for the infantry. The bamboo spear, he calls it a meme list. It's an army build. And yes, it is a thing because bamboo spears are extremely cheap. If we go and look at this year's WTC lists, you'll see that bamboo spears are in almost all the Japanese lists that have been submitted to the WTC. Not all of them are the bamboo horde, though, because we've long ago figured out that that is not effective. The bamboo horde will typically not win games. One, it's a huge investment because you only get those in metal, so they're expensive. And Warlord Games doesn't produce that many of them. But it almost always never wins anyway. So it's not really an effective build. Although I have seen, again, really good Japanese players. The first WTC was individually won by Manuel with a bamboo list. So it can be done. Now, units. Japanese units. He writes, honestly, a single first or second lieutenant, don't ever buy first lieutenants. They're not worth it at all. Take them as cheap as possible because for Japan, the lieutenant has zero value. For most other armies, you use the lieutenant to boost morale. In Japan, you don't need that. You've got Banzai. So the lieutenant is valueless and you're paying 50 points for him. Pay him as cheap as possible because you're never ever going to use him for anything effectful. You're typically, there are a few players who snap to and do so effectively, but it's not really a thing competitively. It's not a way to win games, having that snap to that just breaks the enemy. No, it doesn't happen. So, nope. The Kembatai is really good. And there are a surprising number of really competitive green units in the Japanese roster. So yes, the Kembatai with militia units, perfect. Perfect. So, and it's not a tough combo to get to work. No, it's actually not. What you do is you make the octopus. I should really do a video on the octopus at some point, shouldn't I? Basically, you have your units go like the fingers here on my hand out from a central point where the Kembatai is. So all of these green units are going to be influenced by the Kembatai once they take their first casualty. That's the green octopus. And it works. It really does. Is it a risk? Yes. But it's a risk that you're managing with the Kembatai. And he's so dirt cheap that you should always bring a Kembatai. Even in some lists, we don't have that many green units because it's just a cheap ordered ice. And he's an infantry model, so he can take objectives. Perfect. Right. The infantry is where you should build the bulk of your force. Yes, I agree. We can, again, talk about the Japanese infantry, the best of the game. Some of the best of... They're not nearly there. Not even close. Not even close. I'm sorry, they are not. There are way, way better infantry forces out there. Better for assault, better for shooting. British infantry, they have the best assault units in the game. They have the best veteran units in the game. American infantry, way more deadly than Japanese infantry because of the move and fire rules. German infantry with all their pioneers that you can select, way more dangerous. No, the Japanese infantry is not the best in the game at all. Nope, not true. But it is what the Japanese get their bonuses for. So it's average infantry that gets the national bonuses. And it's basically the only competitive thing that Japanese do have. So you need to be able to make them work. Do you need 40 to 50 models? I think in most Japanese builds, most competitive builds, that is the low end. That is if you're running regulars or veterans. In most competitive builds, you'll see a lot more inexperienced dudes. That means that your body count goes up to 80 or 100 plus. So, yeah, you need, again, more models than what he's saying here. But you should you should take all the infantry shot selections that you possibly can. Always. Squads. You're seeking to get into close combat? Against most opponents, you really shouldn't. And he does write here that the options are fairly limited for equipping your units. There's so few SMGs. The access to Tough Fighter is one of the main drawbacks for Japanese players, because you have infantry that's geared towards close combat, but you have 0 Tough Fighter. I mean, you can get 1, maybe 2 SMGs. Oh, whoop-de-doo. In Japanese para units, you can take 3. Oh, yay. No, it's not enough. It's definitely not enough. You're going to get creamed in close combat most of the time. So, yeah, that is one of the drawbacks, and he does write that. LMGs are controversial. Oh, yes, to say the least. LMGs, I will say it again, are not worth the points. You're paying 20 points for 2 extra shots. That is 10 points per shot. If you're just buying a pintle-mounted MMG for your truck, then you get 5 shots for 15 points. How is those 2 extra shots worth the 5 extra shots you get for a single pintle-mounted for 15 points? It is insane. Don't ever buy LMGs for your infantry, and especially not for Japanese, because you definitely do not want to be sitting out there at range shooting. That is not what you do. No, you are going to try and push up using the terrain until you get to a point where you shoot the enemy with your rifles and then you charge. The LMG is not a benefit in that regard at all. It's a point sink, not worth it. So, knee mortars, though, they are an interesting addition. As he does right here. Alexander writes a rather interesting, and he writes that he hasn't figured out how to use them effectively. I agree. I haven't personally either, but I have seen good players, hi Mark, good players use knee mortars effectively. So what you do is you have several knee mortars in your unit, and this becomes very, very expensive because they're 20 points a pop. But they are a light mortar. And if you have 3 in a unit, that unit can split fire. So you can shoot your rifles one direction and the knee mortars can shoot the other directions, which is interesting in itself. It's one of the only places where infantry units can split fire, right? And because you have 3 of them, you have 3 chances of rolling that 6 to hit. Even better, if you move them as the last unit of the turn, you get 3 chances first, and then if you get the first order dice, you get 3 more chances. So that's 6 chances of rolling a 6. Will that happen? Quite often, yes. And by the way, it's 6s first and then 5s, so you're pretty likely to hit with something. And what happens is that you deliver D2 pins. So suddenly, the unit that you're hitting, not only are they being hit, but they're now have real difficulty in getting away from those hits. And you just keep zeroing in with the rest of the mortars. Once you have hit with one of them, you keep zeroing in with the rest. Because at some point, you're hitting with 3 mortars a turn. That unit is going to die. I have lost SAS, Fanatic Tough Fighter veterans, to a single knee mortar unit that just went up, plunked, hit the 6 or the 5 in the second turn, and then shot at me until I was gone. That is what will happen. And you're going to need to, at some point, you're going to need to rally or do something because you can't move them because you're pinned. You continue to try and move them, you go down, and you get pinned again. So the knee mortars, there's something there, but they are really expensive. So it is a balance that you have to opt to here. Right. As to whether to, and then, here he writes again, as to take regular or veteran infantry, I lean towards regular as to being the better choice for Japan. It is not. Take inexperienced horde infantry or take veterans that are very hard to shift. Regulars are a middle ground that doesn't do either. They're more expensive and they are easier to kill. So, no, don't do that. Right. I have a lot of notes here. Knee mortars, regulars, suiciders. Here we go. The suiciders. Yeah. This is brilliant. What he writes here, this is exactly it. They are lone fanatics with an anti-tank mine attached to the end of a bamboo pole. If they assault, they have an 8+ penetration hit. That is the best you can do in bolt action, by the way. It's brilliant. It's really dangerous, but it's very, very difficult to get them to contact. And here he writes, so they're go down. They're impossible to kill. What you'll do is you'll forward deploy them and see your opponent agonize over how to deal with him. That is what you do. That's exactly it, Alexander. I'm so pleased you wrote that, because they are a threat. They're not actually something that kills most of the games, but they are a threat that your opponent has to deal with, has to think about, and then they start making mistakes. Yes. Then he goes into Japanese artillery. A light AT gun isn't a bad pick. Yes. Controversial statement here. Yes, it is a bad pick. Don't take it. AT guns are never worth it in bold action. Not ever. Just ignore the tank. Have your suiciders block it into a corner where it don't want to move. Ignore it. Don't ever spend points on an AT gun. They are not worth it. If you want to destroy transport or armored cars or light tanks, take an AA gun. An autocannon, that works. But an AT gun, nope. Single dice, because you fail so often. Once you roll that one dice, you fail, right? And so it's not going to do anything. It's going to sit there on ambush, and if the opponent is good, he'll have something indirect just zeroing in on it. That medium mortar, once it hits, your AT gun is dead. It's fixed. You can't do a thing about it. That is 50 points out the window. For competitive games, never ever bring AT guns. Instead, howitzers. Always bring the howitzers. And I don't care if it's light, medium, or heavy. You take whatever you can afford, but the howitzers are just way better, and that is also what Alexander writes here. And he's completely bang on the box with this. And by the way, even light howitzers are a real threat against tanks. Not because they can penetrate and kill the tank, because they can pin it. And a tank that's pinned is not doing anything. So, yeah. As regards to armored vehicles, it's not where you should be spending your points. You should be focusing on your army build and anything that can benefit that. If you can find any, and they're not really there, but if you could find any Japanese vehicles that had autocannons, then yeah, maybe. Otherwise, just go for the Chiha or for the Horo. They are the only two choices that make any sense. The Chiha, really good option, by the way, not what Alexander writes. It's fairly cheap, he writes, armed with a light howitzer. It's not a bad pick. My main issue is the tank has a light howitzer. It's useless against armor. It is not useless. It is absolutely useful. Shoot AT at the armor and watch it pin out. That's what you do. So the Chiha is really useful because it can pin tanks and it can kill infantry. That is the combination you want. At the same time, it doesn't have the Horo's most obvious weakness, which is not open topped, right? So the Horo, which is here, the Horo is what most Japanese players will opt for. It's a great tank, but its main problem, go and watch my recent video on tank tactics for bolt action, is that it's open topped. It is a self-propelled howitzer that's open topped, so if it gets anywhere near enemy infantry or LMGs on vehicles or whatever, it will get pinned and it will do nothing. The Chiha doesn't really have that problem, but then the gun is less deadly. As for transports, which is the final thing he writes about, for 41 points you can get a transport up to 13 men. Consider adding a general purpose truck. Don't do this. That is wrong. Load up your meanest infantry squad. No, your infantry should never ever have to buy a 41 point upgrade in order to connect. Not as a Japanese players. Your infantry should be on foot. You can buy a truck for an engineer unit. That is an interesting idea, but for the Japanese, they don't really have a really good option for that. So, for instance, for Soviets and Brits, you have the universal carrier, the Bren, and Bren carriers with engineers make the perfect combination called Brengineers, right? It's a perfect combination. You have a small unit of 5 men, which is the minimum size. You have a flamethrower, and they can't be killed by small arms because they're in an armored vehicle, so you can easily deliver them. That is the perfect combination. A light truck that will typically die once you approach the enemy, and you're paying 41 points for it, which means you're taking it regular. Don't do that. If you want to start your trucks on the table, buy them inexperienced. If you want them to outflank, yeah, you can take them regular. But either way, the only thing that needs to go in trucks is something that's really deadly. So flamethrowers, engineers. Everything else, the truck is just an extra upgrade that you don't need. And I'm saying this even though I started my career as a competitive bolt action player playing assault infantry in trucks. So I know, I tried this and it doesn't work. Most of the time I ended up figuring out that most of the time my trucks were just stuck, didn't do a thing. They were just mobile cover for my infantry. So no, don't buy trucks. Yes, have one in your collection, by all means, do so. But no. Right. What else? Then he writes a lot about collecting Japanese. That is not something I'll go into. The idea of having a Japanese squad do a couple of turns of fire and then assault, that's the way you play Japanese. So, thank you so much to Alexander for writing this article. It was really, really an enjoyable write. I hope I didn't crap too much on you, but I have strong opinions, as you all know. So, yeah, that was it for me today, and go and read the article. The link is in the description. Right. Cheers.